Hi, welcome to Building Renaissance Leadership Podcast. I'm Vic Vogel. Well, I'm excited about this session because it's going to help explain a lot about why you should be really interested in being good and mastering interpersonal communication. And what I've done is over the last 3 years, I've been looking real hard about what is it about what I was doing when I was a consultant that worked so well with leaders, that allowed them to take what they learned out of a leadership course and apply it effectively with their people. And I didn't realize so much what I was doing back in the 1980s and 90s. If it worked, we just kept doing it and tried to emulate it somehow and improve on it if we could. Around the latter part of 1990s, early 2000s, neuroscience as a science began to come into play when people were looking at the brain and what people were doing and how they were doing it, and they were discovering different parts of the brain based on imaging that allowed them to understand what was happening when people were communicating or behaving or whatever they were looking at. So I began to look at this about 6 years ago when I came out of retirement and started looking around and was looking for all the great things that were happening in leadership, the improvements, and I didn't see any. In fact, it was getting worse. And it's still getting worse today. Yeah, I think you can evidence that by simply looking at the existing leadership of our government. And I'm not citing either side of the aisle. But the reality is corporations have also not made much progress. And that's been evidenced by people like Gallup and Pew and McKinsey and other research companies have shown through longitudinal studies through time a consistent pattern of having low employee engagement, low satisfaction with leadership, low satisfaction with the organization. And there are some companies who did exceptionally well. We call those best practices companies, and they tended to implement much of the things that we're going to talk about today in terms of being able to effectively relate and connect and communicate with people. And for example, one of those companies is Richard Branson's Virgin company, all of his subsidiary companies that go along with that. If you talk and read or look at anything that is associated with employees or people associated with Richard, you'll find they have good things to say about that organization. And it's been a successful organization and successful from a guy who overcame a lot as a kid all the way up. So what I was trying to discern, what was it that was making me have success with people that I was consulting with, and where it worked well, and not everybody I consulted with was successful, but the vast majority were. And it came down to the fact that I was teaching them how not just leadership skills, but how for a particular leadership skill, how you had to communicate that skill. And so I spent a lot of time talking about communication and the processes of communication and interrelationships. And at that time, it was pretty much just a general how you treat people. Now, in the mid 1990s, just before neuroscience came into play, there was an area called emotional intelligence. That is a better definition of interpersonal. because it talks about empathy, it talks about respect, it talks about compassion and the things that are important when you relate to people and trying to understand or feel or sense people. And so that's what I began to realize as I was teaching people how to feel others. And they were able to connect more effectively, adjust their communication to deal with whatever they were coping with. And consequently, employees viewed them as better leaders. They trusted them. They began to put their trust in them. The leaders were approachable to them. And as they improved the communication skills, the leadership skills improved as well. Consequently, employees were engaged. They were satisfied with the company. They were satisfied with the leader. In fact, if you say anything about that leader, you had a battle on your hands. So uh, I was asking myself, why? Why is this happening? And so about 3 years ago, I discovered this neuroscience aspect. I started launching into studying about the brain and how it's working based on the neuroscience. And I was discovering that there are some links, some common links between how the brain works and how we as leaders tend to communicate and connect with people more effectively. The stuff that I was having success with, there seemed to be some relationship between not just the activities we did, but how we did them also. So this is why I launched into neuroscience. I am not in neuroscience. I don't have a degree in neuroscience. I have spent the last 3 years reading everything I can read from deep research articles. Thank God I have a background in that area with my communication. I have 8 years of education in communication, and I was working on my doctorate. So research and research papers and statistics and validity and all that. So I understand very well. So I was able to filter out the articles that made some sense. And I was focusing not on all of the concept of neuroscience because it's a broad field and a lot to it. I was wondering, what was it that made interpersonal communication so effective in helping leaders become better at what they were doing? So I was trying to hone in on what parts of the brain are dealing with and interacting with interpersonal communication, and specifically where emotional intelligence and the communication processes integrated, where they intersected, so that they were almost inseparable. They were bonded together. You had to have good communication skills to effectively have a strong interpersonal connection, and you needed to have the interpersonal communication created the necessity to have quality communication processes in place. So, as I was reading all this stuff, I was kind of narrowing it down to this area. And so this is a summary of kind of what I ran into. And I hope it's useful in helping you understand why I am so adamant, and hopefully you will be adamant about the importance of interpersonal communication and leadership effectiveness. And and you'll be able to see the connections based on how we in our brain tend to process this. There's process this specific areas. So these are generalizations. These are data that I think points to and rationally explains the importance of interpersonal communication. So let's launch into it. Interpersonal communication is the intersection of emotional intelligence and the communication process. So it's a psychological and communication integration, if you will. Emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage one's own emotions as well as the emotions of others. It's a complex process that involves many different brain regions, including the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the insula, primarily for the area that we're talking about, interpersonal communication. The communication process is exchanging ideas, information, and feelings. It's a complex process that involves many different regions, including the Broca's area, the Wernicke area, and the motor cortex area, and some other areas of the brain that we're not going to be touching on in this process. But you really should delve into them on your own to find out a little more about them, because they have to do with things like touch and sensory perception and things like that. The brain allows us to interpret emotions through communication. Neuroscience has assigned different names for different parts of the brain by function, like lobes, different lobes, temporal lobe, frontal lobe, etc. The brain, however, is complex, and these different parts of the brain interact with each other in ways that we're still studying today. At this point, scientists can identify some parts of the brain that share responsibility for various activities we perform, such as communication and emotion. The dichotomy allows us to understand how and where emotional intelligence intersects with communication. So, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that's just above your eyes, kind of extends out over your eyes, is located in the frontmost part of the brain. It's often referred to as the executive center. It's responsible for a wide range of high level cognitive functions, including decision making, planning, and problem solving. Uh, it also plays a role in regulating emotions and integrating emotional intelligence and communication processes. The prefrontal cortex is involved in emotional intelligence in several ways. First, it helps us to understand and regulate our own emotions. For example, when we're angry, the prefrontal cortex can help us calm down and think rationally. And it helps us to understand and respond to emotions of others. For example, when we see someone who is, let's say, sad, and the prefrontal cortex can help us to understand how they are feeling and to respond appropriately to that feeling. The integration of emotional intelligence and communication is such uh, an interesting thing to study. In order to communicate effectively, we need to be able to understand and manage our own emotions as well as the emotions of others. And that's a very important role that leaders play. The prefrontal cortex plays a crucial role in both of those emotional intelligence and communication. When communication or when we're communicating with someone else, the prefrontal cortex helps us understand their emotional state. For example, if we're talking to someone who is angry, the prefrontal cortex can help us understand what we need to do. Well, first to understand that that person's very angry, and then what we need to do, how to respond to it appropriately. The prefrontal cortex also helps us to communicate our own emotions effectively. For example, when we're trying to persuade someone to do something, the prefrontal cortex can help us to choose the right words and even the right tone of voice. The prefrontal cortex is a complex and versatile region of the brain that plays a crucial role in both emotional intelligence and communication. It helps us to understand and manage our emotions as well as our emotions of others. So, The prefrontal cortex is essential for effective communication and social interaction. Additionally, the prefrontal cortex also helps us to communicate our own emotions effectively. For example, when we're trying to persuade someone to do something, the prefrontal cortex can help us choose the right things to say and do. So that's just kind of a summary of the prefrontal cortex. There's another part of the brain that's important, and you can kind of see where the brain is from this image here. This is called the amygdala. It simultaneously interacts with emotional intelligence and communication almost instantaneously. The amygdala is a small arm-shaped structure nestled deep within the temporal lobes. It plays a critical role in both emotional intelligence and communication, particularly in the rapid and often unconscious process of emotions. It's stuff that's happening almost instantly. You don't think about it. You just don't think about it. Well, it doesn't really integrate the same executive planning heavy way that the prefrontal cortex does. The amygdala acts as an emotional radar, constantly scanning and incoming information, including communication cues and triggering rapid emotional responses that then influence both our internal emotional state and our subsequent communication based on that state. So, how does the amygdala interface with emotional intelligence and communication? The amygdala, a small almond shaped structure nestled deep within the temporal lobes of the brain, plays a critical role in both emotional intelligence and communication, particularly in the rapid and often unconscious processing of emotions. While it doesn't integrate the same way the executive planning heavy way as the prefrontal cortex does, the amygdala acts as an emotional radar, constantly scanning incoming information and it, including communication cues and triggering rapid emotional responses that then influence both our internal emotional state and our subsequent communication. Now, it affects us in a lot of different ways. It affects the emotional intelligence and communication interaction in several different ways. The amygdala is lightning fast in processing emotional information, evaluates sensory input, facial things like facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, even subtle shifts in another person's demeanor for emotional significance before conscious thought even kicks in. So you're sensing what people are feeling before you even realize you are. This quick assessment is crucial for survival, allowing us to react quickly to potential threats. This rapid processing forms a foundation for emotional intelligence by providing immediate feedback about the emotional landscape of an interaction that happens to be going on. So, this is pretty valuable information if you're a leader. If you can grasp this, be able to work on it and make it work for you, it's going to have a significant improvement in your leadership. Emotional response trigger is another thing that the amygdala is responsible for. And it's based on its assessments. The amygdala trigger, or based on its assessments, the amygdala triggers physiological responses associated with motions. This could include your heart speeding up, your heart rate increasing, sweating palms, and that uneasy feeling you get, that gut feeling. So this is where that gut feeling comes from. This and combined with another part of the brain we're going to talk about next. These physiological changes prepare the body for action, whether you're going to stand and fight, whether you're going to run, or whether you're going to freeze in place, for example. Those are behaviors. And also influences our internal emotional state, how we're feeling inside ourselves. And our body tells us that. This connection to physiological response is key to emotional intelligence, as recognizing these bodily sensations helps us become more aware of our own emotional state. Now, the amygdala emotional assessment and triggered responses directly influence our communication. If the amygdala detects a threat, we might become more defensive or aggressive in our communication. If it detects warmth and connection, we might be more open and receptive. These influences can be subtle, affecting our tone of voice, our facial expression, and even the words we choose. For example, if the amygdala registers fear, even subconsciously, our voice might tremble slightly, or we might avoid eye contact. This is how some people who take a lot of training in this area, like FBI agents or people who interrogate people, can kind of know when you're lying, or they can sense it anyway. They can sense when you're lying because you have certain things are pretty consistent when you lie about your eyes, about your posture, and a bunch of other things. So, but that's just one aspect of it. And what this plays to most is you and your relationship with being able to assess the connection between you and your employees. So the amygdala is involved in emotional learning also. It associates specific communication cues with particular emotional outcomes. For example, if a certain tone of voice has been associated with anger in the past, the amygdala will more than likely trigger a fear response when hearing that tone again. This learned emotional response can then influence future communication interactions. This is a crucial component of emotional intelligence. It allows us to learn from past experiences and adapt our communication strategies accordingly. So the amygdala is part of that memory process. It's the part that kind of stays in place and can come at a minute's notice. The amygdala also plays a role in emotional contagion, which is the phenomenon where we catch emotions from others. Seeing someone else express an emotion, particularly fear or joy, can activate our own amygdala and trigger a similar emotional response in us. The emotional mirroring influences our own communication and helps us to empathize with others. That's a critical aspect of emotional intelligence. I think about people who watch a movie and they begin to cry because something sad has happened to that person in the movie and they can feel it. This is a physiological reaction to an emotional interpersonal interaction. You're watching this in the movie, the person, something happens, a parent dies, a child dies, or something. And you can just feel it in yourself what would happen if that happened to you, or maybe it's happened to you and you feel it again. And what happens is you have a physiological response to that, which is tears. And then, of course, you wipe them away and say it's allergies. At least that's what I do. But in reality, it's okay. That's what's going on. It's a normal reaction. It's a normal reaction. But that's how powerful this is. And you'll be able to see this in your employees. Sometimes you'll notice something about them that's off. They may be having trouble at home and they're trying to hide it and keep it away from people. And it's not just the work you're sensing it in. You're sensitive in their behavior because normally they're open, they're friendly, they're talking. This time they're quiet, their heads down, and they're not interested in talking to anybody. And their facial features are not showing the joy that they normally express at work. That's something you should probably delve into, but you want to know how to do that. So, how do you respond to that? It's coming up. So, the next thing, this is where we began to learn a little more about how we're being able to understand the feelings of others. It's the insula. The insula is a small region of the cerebral cortex stuck deep into the lateral sulcus, the fold separating the temporal and parietal lobes. Uh, it plays a fascinating role in the intersection of emotional intelligence and communication. While its functions are complex, and we're still studying those, and we got to learn a lot more about those. The insula is strongly associated with the introception, and that's the awareness of your interbodily states, your the things that you don't control, you don't think about. They're automatic, like your heart rate and your breathing and your digestion and things like that. Um, it's strongly associated with that, and your ability to sense that and the awareness of your internal bodily states, like empathy and self-awareness, all of which are crucial for navigating the emotional landscape of communication. It acts as a bridge between our internal world, how we're feeling inside, of physiologically feeling inside, and the external world of social interaction, where we're taking in all those sensory things. Now, introspective awareness, the insula is involved with that and emotional processing. The insula is primarily a hub of introception, meaning it monitors and interprets our internal bodily signals. This includes sensations like heart rate, breathing, and gut feelings. Again, that along with the amygdala, that's where your gut feeling comes from. And even such subtle shifts as temperature. The physiological changes are often linked to emotions, and the insula's ability to sense these internal states allows us to become more aware of our own emotional responses. For example, the insula might register the increased heart rate and butterflies in your stomach when you're nervous about giving a presentation, making you consciously aware of your anxiety. This awareness is a fundamental component of emotional intelligence. The insula also plays a crucial role in empathy and the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. When we observe someone else experiencing an emotion through their facial expression, body language, or tone of voice, the insula activates, mirroring their emotional state within ourselves. This allows us to feel to some extent what they are feeling. That's that crying at the movie, the sadness of what's happening to that person in the movie. It's coming from that insula. The shared feeling is essentially for understanding others' emotions and responding appropriately. So there you go. It's appropriate to cry at a movie if it's sad. A key aspect of emotional intelligence. So you want to have a higher EQ score? Cry at a movie. For instance, seeing someone cry might activate your insula, allowing you to feel sad and respond to with compassion. And that's what you're doing when you have those tears. And you may take actions to deal with it. This is an important factor to understand when you're talking about interfacing with your people. If you're not interfacing with your people, if you're not spending time communicating, you're not understanding, or you may be missing some of this stuff because it requires the sensory perception for you to do that. It can't happen by sending an emoji. Okay. You can hug somebody tightly, and all of those internal feelings, those interoceptive internal feelings, if you had any kind of anxiety, if somebody is hugging you tightly and really squeezing you tightly, and it's appreciated, it's not an unwanted hug. It's a hug, a wanted hug that really you can almost feel the tension drain from your body. Your whole internal body begins to calm down and relax. And particularly if you're holding the person close to your chest, if there's that physical contact, that hug, that squeeze, and says something to the body that it's okay, and you calm down, and that's the insula working with you from that process. When you send an emoji, you don't get that same response. You get a response because it's a picture and you associate it with caring and concern, but you are not going to get that same physiological response that the insula produces from that. So that's important for you to understand. The insula integrates information from both internal bodily states and external communication cues. It combines the raw emotional data from interoception with the emotional information gleaned from facial expressions, tone of voice, and other nonverbal cues. These integrated information, or this integrated information, the integrated information you get from those two things, internal and external sensory, provides a richer and more nuanced understanding of the emotional context of the communication interaction. That's an absolutely great point and a great discovered point that I picked up through this information. This small brain part is helping you to really get your hands around the context, because you're not just hearing this thing, you're feeling it, you're emotionally in tune with this person. That's a very important trait to have as a leader. No, when they tell you to don't get personally involved with people, you can't help but do it. You're a human. When you're connecting, you're already there. Your brain is putting you into that state. For example, the insula might combine the feeling of unease in the stomach or interoception with the other person's tense posture and sharp tone of voice to create a strong sense that they are angry. And that interoceptive feeling you're getting is called fear. So that's an example of how you're connecting with someone else. The insula's processing of emotional information directly influences our communication, our awareness of our own emotions. Thanks to the insula's interoceptive function, affects how we express ourselves. Our empathetic understanding of others and emotions, mediated by the insula, influences how we respond to them. The insula helps us to communicate with greater emotional sensitivity and adapt our communication style to the emotional climate of the interaction. An extremely valuable point for leaders to grasp. If the insula registers your own nervousness, you might consciously choose to speak more slowly and clearly. If it registers sadness in the other person, you might offer words of comfort and support. It's okay. The insula contributes to self awareness also, particularly in the context of social interactions. By integrating interoceptive information with social cues, the insula helps us understand how our own emotions and the behaviors are perceived by others. The self awareness is essential for effective communication and for building strong interpersonal relationships. The insula helps us to reflect on our own communication style and make adjustments as needed. So, how does all this stuff happen? Well, it happens through neural pathways. The amygdala and the insula communicate with other brain regions and the body through neural pathways back and forth. These pathways involve the autonomic nervous system, which has to do with those things that happen automatically in you, breathing, digestion, heart rate, those things, blood pressure. The endocrine system, it interfaces with that, which releases hormones into the bloodstream. Those are the things like your dopamine to make you feel good, or serotonin to kind of make you a little more mellow. And then there are some other ones from the somatosensory cortex, which process sensory information like touch, and it's tactile, like I touch your skin, I bump you, or things like that. Excuse me 1 second here. Now, the combined activity of the amygdala and insula leads to a variety of emotional responses. And so, this combination of them acting together, along with the other parts of the brain and the prefrontal cortex and all the sensory communication and information coming in, changes your heart rate, your breathing, and your blood pressure. It can change your interoceptive areas. It changes muscle tension and sweating. These are the tactile things that we talked about. The emotional feelings. These are fear and anxiety and disgust. And behavioral responses like fight or flight or freeze in place. So these two parts of the brain, along with your prefrontal cortex, are essential in helping you understand what's happening when you're connecting. And this is, I tell this to people when they come back and tell me I've had an active listening course. I say, well, what do you learn? And they go, well, we learned to pay attention. So there's things that you want to do. You want to listen intently. You want to make sure you're making eye contact. Why do you want to make sure you're making eye contact? So they know you're paying attention to you. And I'm going, yeah, you do. That's important. But did you know that they are already connecting with you in front of that? The minute you sit down with them, before you start the conversation, as you begin your conversation, they are in tune with you, because these parts of the body, the amygdala and the insula, can not only tell you how you're feeling, it can tell you how they're feeling. And they know also how you're feeling before you utter a word. You're getting sensory perception already. You can sense this when your boss comes to you and says, "Can I see you a minute?" And the first thing is your heart rate starts pumping faster. I mean, we're already into that. And what you may not be aware of as a leader is that's already happening. This person's, they're nervous. They're beginning to sweat. Their heart rate's beating faster. Blood pressure's up. You ask them to come in, and they have no idea why. Just come talk to me privately. They are so the amygdala is associating immediately that that's not good. That's not good. And so when you do this as a leader, when you come and talk to somebody and you come out and say, "I'd like to talk to you privately for a few minutes," it's nothing serious. That begins to reduce that pressure considerably. But you need to add that extra amount. You need to understand what you're doing when you come out and make that offer as a head of a department to somebody come talk to you privately in your office. That most of the time employees are associating that with something bad. So you need to follow that up so they can understand this isn't something bad. Now, if it is something bad, you may want to send them an email or something, or maybe you want to just say, let's come in and talk for a few minutes. I've got some things about your work area I need to discuss. They at least know that's happening, and they begin to regulate how they're going to deal with that. So these are important things for you to keep in mind in this area. So some real just key points about the prefrontal cortex to kind of summarize and refresh your memory. The prefrontal cortex is located in the frontmost part of the brain. It's often referred to as the executive center and is responsible for a wide range of higher level cognitive functions, including decision making, planning, and problem solving. It also plays a crucial role in regulating emotions and integrating emotional intelligence in the communication process. It's divided into two hemispheres, the left brain and the right brain. The left hemisphere is responsible for a wide range of higher level cognitive functions, including decision making, planning, problem solving, and those things. The right hemisphere focuses more on emotions, communication, creativity, and spatial issues, how far apart things are, sometimes 3D, 2D, those things. You can learn more about leadership ability to manage your brain through a program called Positive Intelligence. I'll leave you a link to that. You want to take that test, and as you take that test, it'll bring some of these things to mind, and you'll see how it's applied in everyday work environments by a firm that was working on this exact thing, how to help you do this better. The right hemisphere and the left hemisphere concern uh, are connected, by the way, uh, with neural pathways, and they're doing this in a continuous way with each other. So the brain appears to be one functional organ. It's split. There's actually a chasm there, but there are neural connections between the right and left brain. They're constantly, everything the right brain is seeing, and the left brain is seeing almost instantly also, and vice versa. And the amygdala and the insula are processing that information and sharing that. There's an amygdala and an insula for the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. They're very close to each other. They are connected through the neural pathways and are also sharing that information almost instantaneously. So that's why it appears to be just a normal one kind of thing, that you see something and you associate it with something, but there's a lot of things going on in that process that are transpiring at a rate that we're not sure. I think we know how fast or how much right now. The amygdala, just to kind of refresh your memory, that's that small almond-shaped structure nestled in the temporal lobe, plays a critical role in both emotional intelligence and communication, particularly in the rapid and often unconscious processing of emotion. I talk about this like if you're out on, if you've ever walked in the woods, you step on a stick and it breaks, you hear the sound, you know what that feels like under your foot. But you've also seen snakes. And maybe you've never stepped on a snake, but you know that they're long and narrow like a stick and they wiggle. So if you're walking up on a tree stump and you can't see over it, you step over it and you step on something that seems hard and it cracks and you hear that sound, you pretty much know you have a stick and you keep on walking. If you step over and you step on that narrow, thin thing and it starts to wiggle, you jump because The amygdala has a history of you walking in the woods, and snakes are long and narrow and they slither. And so when it moves like it's slithering underneath your foot, that tactile feeling is processed, and all your internal organs and emotions send the signal to the brain: run, jump, get off of this. So that's how that works. While it doesn't integrate the same way the executive heavy planning way that the prefrontal cortex does, the amygdala acts as an emotional radar, constantly scanning incoming information, including communicative cues. It stores that information and in triggering rapid emotional responses when necessary. That then influences both your internal emotional state and your subsequent actions and behaviors or communication. Uh, the insula is a small region. We saw where that was. It's tucked into the brain around the temporal lobe. Plays a fascinating role in the intersection of emotional intelligence and communication. Um, while its functions are complex and still being researched, the insula is strongly associated with introception or awareness of internal body states, empathy, and self awareness, all of which are crucial for navigating the emotional landscape of communication and associating those feelings with emotional states. It acts as a bridge between our internal world and the external world of social interaction. So this is how I know you know that I know. Believe it or not, that's a thing, and it's a real thing, and it has physiological and communicative and interpersonal and emotional, um, all wrapped up in one, almost instantaneous. Why, when you're active listening, you really are, you want to get into the emotional states, just almost like you're watching the movie and you start crying because something sad happened. If something sad is happening to somebody and they're sad, you want to feel that emotional state because that's going to generate the proper based on your experience, that's going to generate the proper behavior that you're going to respond to that person for. So there's something deeper in active listening than you probably learned, but hopefully you've got some information to add to what you learned about active listening that's going to make you more attentive. Because trust me, if you're sitting there and you go, wow, you seem to be upset. That lets them know you're listening. They know you're upset. But if you do this, I can really sense that you're feeling really angry about this. Tell me more, please. That, the nonverbal cues, the tone of voice, the approach you take, makes all the difference in the person's world, whether you sincerely are interested in their well-being and you truly can feel what they're feeling. That's empathy. And now allows you to approach using the right compassion. So that's the neuroscience of interpersonal communication and why I believe that interpersonal communication is so critical for you delivering these skills, the skills of conflict management and performance feedback and dealing with diversity in your team and managing conflict or resolving conflict and building trust and inspiring motivation. All these skills that I teach in my interpersonal communication leadership course, uh, all of these skills, each one of those skills require a different approach, a communicative approach that you're going to be using. Some of them require more active listening than others, and that requires you to feel those things. All of them kind of require you to have that sense of connection with your employee. So that's something you may have been told is what you don't want to get involved in. And I'm telling you, that's exactly what you want to get involved in. You want to be able to have those kind of connections. That's what leads to them being able to sense that you do care and you are sincere. So they are sensing that from you. And when they do, they will begin to trust you. They will begin to come to you. They will begin to tell you the truth. They'll begin to tell you the bad things you don't want to hear because they're afraid it's going to do more harm to you. They become concerned about you. The relationship becomes stronger. When that happens within organizations, leaders who grasp this on a larger scale in the organization, you begin to build what's called a community. And there you go. That is the leadership paradigm change we need to make, the role change we need to make, the organizational change we need to make, the things we want happening in an organization that are far different than what we're experiencing today. Now, this podcast will be on the Building Renaissance Leadership podcast. Please watch it all the way through once. Then go back, because it'll be time-stamped. Go back and watch each of the areas that you are a little foggy on. Watch it again. Then take the information that's coming down in the description, the resources I'm going to provide you. Go discover more about this yourself, because you will be far, far more effective at connecting and interacting with your employees and regulating their behavior in a way that's beneficial to them and to you and to the organization, which is what we're missing so much of right now. As I think about it, I think probably executives who want people back in the office are experiencing some of this, or lack of some of this connectivity, and they probably don't know that. So give this video to them to watch. It may help them understand what they're experiencing and be able to explain more why they want people back in the office. But if you're going to have people remote, you have to make the conciliations of sensory perception and things that excite and ignite the amygdala and the insula within your remote employees and create that same kind of interpersonal communication, interconnectivity that is going to build the trust and the bond and the strength you need as an organization to take care of each other and to progress together and to be sensed as valued. Okay, so any questions you have, please feel free to reach me through my website there. Also, you can reach me at vicvogel46@gmail.com. I'll make sure I put that on somewhere on one of these slides. And I hope this helps you. If it does, please share this with as many people as you possibly can. It's going to make a big difference, not just in leadership. These are things that can make a difference whether you're dealing with your children, your spouse, your friends, other people that you're trying to deal with. Having this kind of knowledge is extremely beneficial. So until our next podcast, stay safe and take some time to get to know your people.